Hello everybody, my name is Slimee and welcome to my episode 8 review, recap, and breakdown of Westworld, Trace Decay. We finally find out a little more about the Man in Black's backstory. We find out a little more about Bernard's backstory, and we find out a little more about Dolores's backstory. So the episode starts with Bernard coming back online, and he is completely freaking out about what he just did to Teresa. Bernard is really confused. He says that he cared for Teresa and that he loved her. And then Ford tells him this really great quote that comes from Dr. Frankenstein. "One man's life or death were but a small price to pay for the acquirement of the knowledge which I sought, for the dominion I should acquire." Essentially what he's trying to say is that it doesn't really matter if someone dies as long as it helps to fulfill a scientific goal. Bernard says that he doesn't want to help and that he's about to attack Ford when Ford issues a command to freeze him in place and pretty much tells him that one of the beautiful things is being able to tone down those emotions and to actually completely remove them. And he also tells him that he's not the first person to feel this sort of anger towards him and want to try and stop him. That Arnold once felt that way too, but was also unsuccessful in trying to stop him. This leads to the possibility that Ford might have killed Arnold, or that someone else might have killed Arnold. After he shuts off Bernard's anger and all of his emotions, he tells him that he really needs the old Bernard back, the one who can get shit done, essentially, and tells him that he's going to have to start by covering up the murder and take all these different steps to ensure that no one is able to trace it back to them. And that once he's done this, he'll give Bernard what he wants, freedom from these memories. Next, we move to Maeve in the saloon, where she hears and sees the new Clementine. And once Clementine walks away, Maeve has a flashback to her time back on that homestead with the little girl. And we next see her in the lab asking why she's having these memories. Sylvester and Felix essentially explain the difference between humans and hosts and how memories work. How with humans, memories tend to fade and get fuzzy. And the distinction of them from reality is much easier for humans. I think this idea lends more credence to the fact that people like Felix and Sylvester and the rest of the people that work for Westworld are largely human and they're not, in fact, hosts. They then explain to Maeve that her being a host, her ability to recall these memories, they don't fade, they don't get fuzzy. She essentially relives them, and that's what makes her so different from them. In our next scene, we're back with William and Dolores as they're riding. Dolores mentions to William that she feels like she's been in this place before and that they're close to home, wherever home is. Clearly, home to her is not the Abernathy Ranch. She is thinking of another place having to do with Arnold more likely. She walks off from William on her own and spots a bunch of dead bodies on the beach. It's a bunch of dead Confederados soldiers, all with arrows sticking out of them. They correctly deduce that it was a Ghost Nation ambush, and they find one of the soldiers still alive. The soldier reveals to them that he was part of an ambush sent to capture them, and when William asks how he knew where they would be, the man mentions that a new recruit out of Pariah had said that they had boarded a train and were heading in that direction, and to keep an eye out for them and El Lazo. Dolores insists on getting the man more water, and despite William's protests, to which it seems like Dolores is a little bit surprised, maybe shocked, because it kind of comes off as callous. Meanwhile, Dolores walks down to the body of water there to get more water, and as she's filling up the canteen, she notices herself floating face down in the water. She is in the gunslinger outfit both there on the beach and face down in the water. On the reversal shot behind her, we notice that the beach is empty. We hear a voice say, "Come and find me." It is both Dolores's voice and Bernard/Arnold, Bernarnold, his voice, and it's their voices meshed together. It once again kind of catches her off guard. She stumbles back, she turns around and says, "William?" But the entire beach is empty. There's no William, there's no soldiers, there's nothing. She turns back around to the water, The body is suddenly gone, and when she turns back to face the beach, all the soldiers and William are back there again. She comes back, and quite literally, as she shows up and kneels down, the man dies right in front of her. So then we're in a medical room with Ford, Hale, and Stubbs as they cover up the body of Teresa Cullen. Stubbs reveals that they found her at the bottom of the same ravine that they found the woodcutter, and that he suspects that she was attempting to do the same thing that the woodcutter was trying to do. Stubbs says he found a device near her body, and then we see on the tray table both the device that was inside the woodcutter, and then we see a small transmitting device next to that, being the device that he says that they found near Teresa, and that it was loaded with all kinds of really sensitive information, and that it seemed like she was attempting to smuggle information out of the park. Stubbs also notes that this isn't the first time that something like this has happened, where a third party has blackmailed an employee to smuggle data outside of the park. When Hale asks Stubbs if they have any idea who she was trying to get the information to, he says that they don't. She was unable to send the transmission, so they have no idea where it was going. And then a game of chess breaks out, essentially, between Hale and Ford as they kind of go back and forth with Stubbs in the middle of it, about the death and what it means. And essentially, Hale says that this is very out of character of Teresa to be doing something like this, that she was very loyal and that something seems fishy, which Ford counteracts that he knows that the test was a hoax, it was all a big setup. And then once again, we kind of have this interesting back and forth between the two characters. We see this very sly smile that Ford gives Hale in the middle of one of his little monologues that essentially says, yeah, I killed her, and you'll never be able to prove it, and there's nothing you're ever going to be able to do to stop me. And it was so subtle, it was just the tiniest little thing. And it spoke way more than any of the dialogue either of the two characters exchanged. Back downstairs, Sylvester comes in freaking out that the people upstairs are investigating this incident. He tells Maeve that she has to go back into the park and go back to playing dumb for now. Maeve apparently is finished with most of her tinkering. She hands the behavior tablet back to Felix, and she says in oh so many words that she's just that much closer to putting the puzzle together. And then suddenly she asks, who is Arnold? It doesn't seem like Sylvester knows who Arnold is. It doesn't seem like he cares either. And that essentially her plan is to continue to blackmail them, to get them to take her up to the behavior center to make some serious changes to her core code. Sylvester wants no part in it. The two, there's like a bit of a back and forth, and then Felix and Sylvester both leave the room. They have their own discussion, or partially an argument. Sylvester wants to destroy Maeve while she's in a shutdown mode up in behavior. Felix doesn't quite seem like he's on board with it. Maeve is sitting inside looking outside. It seems like she can hear everything they're saying, and if she can't hear, she can probably read lips every time they turn around and look at her. And then next we're with the Man in Black and Teddy riding on looking for Wyatt, with the Man in Black essentially being like, there's got to be an easier way to find her, to which Teddy responds, hey, if there was an easier way, we'd go. And the Man in Black says, well, there probably is an easier way, but you only remember the things that Ford lets you to remember. To which Teddy responds, I know everything I need to. My vision is clear. And then the Man in Black responds, you never understand that the game is rigged. You're here to be a loser. And then suddenly Teddy has this flashback in an instant back to something that happened in the very first episode, and he hears that echo of the Man in Black once again telling him back then that he was there to be a loser. And then we're back to them on horseback. There's this just look of confusion on Teddy's face because he doesn't quite know what to make of it. And as they continue to ride on, they come across a whole bunch of dead bodies. There's one survivor. It's a woman, and as they kind of turn her over, it's revealed to be Angela. Now, those of you who might not be familiar with her by name, Angela is the host that first brought William into the park in episode 2 when him and Logan disembarked the train in the underbelly of Delos. To help jog your memory, here's just like a couple of images I'm going to put down here of her in her various scenes that we're going to see her. One being, you know, when she's there with William, bringing him into the park. The other one is her during the dance training sequence that we see later on in the episode and in a prior episode. I believe it was last week. And then her right here. Upon seeing her, the man in black seems a little bit surprised and says, "It's you. I figured they retired you. Guess Ford never likes to waste a pretty face." And this kind of hints at the whole idea that William might potentially be the man in black, as he would still have recognized her from when he was first introduced to the park 30 years ago. Suddenly they get ambushed. They put up a pretty good fight. Teddy unloads his gun into the attacker, to which it does nothing. The man in black gets a bit of a stranglehold on him with a rope. And as he's tugging him away, just the way he's doing it, it causes Teddy to once again flash back to what happened in episode 1 when the man in black was dragging Dolores away. The man in black calls for help, that, you know, grab the thing, let's kill this guy. They kill the attacker, and then Teddy starts to approach the man in black, discussing that he remembers things now, and he remembers exactly who the man in black is before cold cocking him with the revolver and knocking him unconscious. Then we go back upstairs with Sylvester and Felix as they take Maeve up into the behavior center to make the changes. They put her in shutdown mode, and once she's in shutdown mode, Sylvester is just like, all right, let's end this, let's kill the bitch. And then suddenly we're with Lee Sizemore training a host. Charlotte Hale shows up to recruit him to replace Teresa, essentially. She reveals to Sizemore that Teresa wasn't a bad guy and that she was doing everything to help Delos in a special project for the board of directors. After demoralizing Sizemore in regards to his complete lack of importance to Westworld as a whole, and the fact that Ford doesn't really hold him in any high regard whatsoever, and that he's just left to busy work to keep him out of everyone else's hair, she recruits him and says, how about you work for me? Screw Ford, because he's not done anything for you. And this seems to kind of sway Sizemore, as we've kind of surmised from previous episodes. Sizemore's kind of out for himself. He really doesn't give a shit about anybody else. He just wants to make something of himself. So for him to be able to kind of climb the ladder, so to speak, and to help someone important out, he's all for it. Then we go back downstairs with Maeve, Felix, and Sylvester as they have her back down in the other area, and their plan has been completed. Maeve suddenly wakes up. It completely freaks Sylvester out. Sylvester's like, what did you do? She reveals that Felix pretty much worked with her and worked against Sylvester. And she reveals what some of the different changes to her core code actually were, as she suddenly grabs a scalpel, jumps off the bed, and slashes Sylvester's throat open. Suddenly, just blood starts spurting out. He starts gasping. He goes down. And she makes it pretty clear that she's in charge. She can now hurt people. It even seems to kind of take her by surprise. There's this look of like primal fury on her face after she does it. Felix is just appalled and is like, oh my God, you said you weren't gonna hurt him. And with the best line, she says, you of all people should know just how duplicitous I am. And then says that, you know, we might need him, so go fix him up. He grabs this weird futuristic device that's straight out of Star Trek and just kind of goes over and closes the wound right up. And I guess Sylvester's going to be okay. Then Maeve says that it's time for her to recruit her army. And then suddenly we're topside once again, back up in Sweetwater, as she makes her way into the Mariposa Saloon. She starts kind of flexing her muscles, so to speak, by issuing administrative commands to change host directives, small things, and finding out that it works. She is now essentially like Bernard. She is a host who has control of other hosts. She then looks out the window, though, and sees this little girl, and it triggers another flashback back to the homestead. We see a little more of what happened. Once again, we see the man in black open up that door, walk in, and jam a knife into her abdomen. This suddenly jolts her back to the present, where she quickly grabs at her abdomen and then looks down. And then Hector shows up and she goes outside and she just kind of does her own little thing. She starts making small changes, issuing commands to the hosts, and having fun with it while Hector and crew just kind of go to town. They're able to successfully rob the safe and get away with it. Whether this was actually important for Hector in any way, shape, or form, I'm not entirely sure. I think this was just Maeve testing the waters with a safe narrative, seeing if she could successfully help Hector get away with it, as opposed to being stopped by the lawmen, which has happened in just about every other version of this narrative. We're then back to a really, really interesting and deep scene with Ford and Bernard once again. They're back downstairs in the basement of the house in Sector 17. Ford says, "Thank you for dealing with an unfortunate situation. Now we can resume work on our new narrative without interference." Bernard asks if Hale will still be a problem, to which Ford responds that she probably will, but they'll be able to handle it. And then Ford asks Bernard, "What do you really feel?" And then mentions that he's in a really unique position at this moment. Bernard mentions that he's, really confused by everything, and he wants to know more about his feelings and whether or not they're real, everything with his wife and his dead son. And Ford very callously just mentions, "You of all people, Bernard, should know that every host needs a backstory." And suddenly we're left wondering if the wife and dead son are something connected to Arnold, or whether they're just simply a red herring this whole time, and they really just were a fictional backstory created to make him more lifelike, as Ford says. And then Bernard asks this really important question, which can essentially be summed up with, what exactly is the difference between a host and a human? It seems like we are so similar. What is the difference? How is your pain different from my pain, and vice versa? And then Ford replies that was the question that consumed Arnold, filled him with guilt, and drove him to madness. He ultimately says, though, that there is no threshold, that they are more alike than they realize, and that humans essentially are running on their own loops, doing whatever anyone tells them to do, and that people aren't truly free, and that consciousness in its truest form doesn't really exist for humans or hosts, and that at the end of the day, that they're a lot more alike than they realize. And then he tells Bernard that he's really not missing anything by not being truly human. Bernard insists on asking one last question. "Have you ever made me hurt someone before?" To which a shocked looking Ford says, "Well, no, of course not." And right as, he goes to hit the erase button, Bernard suddenly has this quick flashback to something we were all fearing, and we see Bernard murdering Elsie, strangling her from behind while she's in the theater. It was a really quick flash, and there's probably a bunch of people that are like, well, how can you be sure that that's actually Elsie? And the reason I can be so sure is that the image right here is a great shot of Elsie alive, and take a very good look at her face and where those little lines in her face appear. And then take a look at the woman being strangled, and take a look at where those same lines are. It's also important to note the boots, the ground, very similar to the abandoned theater. And I think it's safe to say that, unfortunately, Elsie is dead. I'm kind of bummed that she got a lame off-screen death like that. She deserved a little better, but Elsie is indeed dead at the hands of Bernard. And he has this brief flash of it right before Ford completes the memory erase. It's a possibility that something like that will stick with Bernard, and that this is ultimately going to come back to either haunt him or haunt Ford, or ultimately haunt both of them. And then he says, "Best not to dwell on those troubling memories. Otherwise, you might be drawn back into them. You might lose yourself into them like some of your fellow hosts have." Immediately next, we cut over to William and Dolores again as they continue to ride on. Dolores says, "This is the way," and as they make their way into a clearing, she says, "We're here, I'm home." We get this over-the-shoulder shot of Dolores while she's still wearing her gunslinger outfit to a town in the distance. several buildings, and at the farthest end, a white church with a steeple. Dolores walks onwards alone. We get a shot from the front to the back. We don't see William behind it, but given the last reversal shot we had, the background is a little bit different, and it is plausible that she is just ahead of William and he is out of frame. It's also worth noting that she is still in the gunslinger outfit at this exact moment as she continues to walk onward. She gets a little closer to the town, and as she approaches the town, it's completely empty. We get a reaction shot on Dolores, and then the camera pans around her in 180 degrees, and about 90 degrees in, we get a classic J.J. Abrams lens flare, and then as we come back behind the over-the-shoulder shot, we see that the town is alive and bustling and full of people. Dolores walks into town, and she is no longer in the gunslinger outfit. She's back in her old dress. So at this point, with the lens flare and the change in outfit, we know that this is an actual flashback, and pretty soon as she makes her way down the main street, that this is indeed a flashback. We see the hosts all being trained in their very early stages. They're still just learning everything. Worth noting is hearing one of the techs congratulate Maeve on doing well with her dance partner. Another interesting thing to note is that the other host that we focus on, the one who breaks free from her dance partner, is the same host that was shown in episode 3 while Ford was talking with Bernard about the past. That this is the same host that was shown having been labeled a lunatic for hearing voices in her head and everything, and that she didn't fare too well with the whole bicameral system. It's interesting to note that as she walks away, she's looking skyward as the tech comes over and brings her back to her dance partner. It's symbolic of her breaking free of a loop. And her looking out into the sky is the notion of her realizing that there is something more to the world than just the world she exists in. I think that from the reaction shot we get from Dolores, that she almost sees this same exact kind of thing, that she's almost putting that together. But I think that might just be a little bit more coincidental, and I'm reading into that one just a little bit too far. I've just ever so slightly stepped out. Dolores then hears the church bell. She turns, and then there's the white church at the very end. As she starts walking towards it, she encounters that little girl from the Mexican town who asks her, "Did you find what you were looking for, Dolores?" It's unclear whether that is actually something that happened in the flashback or if that is something that is kind of transcending that in a sense. It almost seems like this little girl is a way of continuing to push Dolores, and it just seems like such an out-of-place question for her to ask if she found what she is looking for. Clearly Dolores has not yet found what she is looking for. She thinks she has, but she apparently hasn't. Suddenly we hear gunshots ring out. The little girl runs away. Dolores turns. We see a whole bunch of people being shot. We get another reaction shot to Dolores, and then we see what Dolores is reacting to, and it's herself standing in front of her once again, just like many other scenes prior, and she has a gun to her head. She is about to pull the trigger on the gun when suddenly we are jolted back into the pseudo-present. It's getting really confusing here, so we're just going to say that she jumped back to the time when she's with William. William grabs the gun away from her. Dolores looks around, and the only thing around them is the burned out and blackened church steeple sticking out of the ground. And Dolores says, "Where are we?" "We're here, together." "Well then, when are we? Is this now? Am I going mad? Are you real?" she says. "Of course I'm real. I can't tell anymore. It's like I'm trapped in a dream or a memory from a life long ago. One minute I'm here with you and the next." And then she trails off and then says, "This is what Arnold wants. He wants me to remember." William says that Arnold's not there and that it's really important for them to get away from there. And, they run off, the camera pulls back, and once again we see that they are in a barren wasteland, and the only thing there is the church steeple. Next, we're with them in the night as they wander back through the prairie area, and then they hear horses in the distance and see a group of soldiers approaching them. Men on horseback arrive. It is revealed that their de facto leader is Logan, who essentially tells them that he's been looking for them for a couple of days now and that they are both fucked. It is clear that Logan has gone full-on evil at this point and that William might be in a lot of trouble. Next, we're back with Sizemore and Hale as they make their way into cold storage down in B-83. They make their way through all the bodies towards the back where we see a familiar face, Peter Abernathy. Charlotte then begins uploading data to Abernathy, and when Sizemore asks what she's doing, she says that she is uploading 35 years of vitally important data to the host, because all of that data would never fit on a single drive, but these hosts can carry all that data, especially one that's been wiped clean. When Sizemore asks what that data is, she says, "You don't need to know." And then says, "Your only job here is to program a basic personality into this thing so I can get it on a train and get it outside of Westworld." And then we get our final, most important scene where with Teddy, the man in black, and Angela as they sit around a campfire. The man in black is tied up. Teddy reveals that he knows what happened at the farmstead back during episode 1 and that he knows what the man in black did. The man in black seems a little surprised and says, "Ah, you're starting to remember now." He then mentions who he really is outside of Westworld by saying that he's a titan of industry, a philanthropist, a family man, that he's married to a beautiful woman and has a beautiful daughter. His wife overdosed on pills and died, and that at the funeral his daughter blamed him and said that he drove her mother to kill herself. He terrorized the two of them every day. He wanted to find out if he really was a monster. So he tracked down this woman at a homestead who had a daughter. It's revealed that it's Maeve and her daughter. He goes into the homestead. He stabs the woman. He murders the daughter. While we're hearing the man in black's monologue, we're also seeing an intercut of Maeve in present time. She remembers the attack again, and she remembers pulling the knife out and slashing the man in black's throat with it. And then suddenly she's back in the present again, where she has just slit Clementine's throat. The man in black's monologue continues on. He reveals that he killed the woman and then he killed her daughter, just to see what I felt. Then, just when I thought it was done, the woman refused to die. Then he says something miraculous happened. Maeve was alive, truly alive, like a human, if only just for a moment. And then the maze was revealed to the man in black, as Maeve collapses in the center of the maze logo on this farm. Then we get a flashback to Maeve inside the behavior center after the murder of her daughter. Ford and Bernard are trying to sort her out, and she is just completely distraught over the murder of her child, and none of the voice commands are working on her. They can't freeze her. They can't seem to shut her down. Ford's going through his tablet and finally finds a way to shut her down. They wipe her memory and reassign her a new role. After her memory's been wiped, she just kind of sits there blankly, and then suddenly Maeve just jumps up, grabs a scalpel, and jams it into her neck. And then we're jolted back to the present, where Maeve grabs at her neck while she's sitting in her house and is taken away by 3 of the Westworld techs. Back with the man in black, Teddy, and Angela. Angela is encouraging Teddy to just kill the man in black. Teddy walks over and puts a gun to the man in black's head, just like in episode 1, but just like in episode 1, still can't pull the trigger. To which Angela says, "Why don't you let me help?" She suddenly stabs him in the shoulder with an arrow. The man in black seems shocked, and then she reveals herself to essentially be working for Wyatt, that the whole thing was a setup, and suddenly a whole horde of Wyatt's men just come crawling out of the woodwork. So that's it for the breakdown. Getting into some of the theories and everything, we can safely say that the man in black will be back for season 2. as Ed Harris accidentally let slip that he will be returning for the next season and had already talked to Jonathan Nolan. Once again, we get this whole idea of connecting William and the Man in Black. In last week's episode, we heard William say that, the park isn't necessarily about just catering to your baser instincts and your primal needs, that it's about finding who you really are and finding the deeper meaning. In this time frame, the Man in Black says that the park is there to reveal your true self, almost echoing the same exact words that William used last week. One of the interesting theories out there after tonight's episode is the notion that Dolores is actually Wyatt in a sense. She's not Wyatt in the storyline, but she was Wyatt 35 years ago when Arnold died. In her flashback at the town, we see Dolores in a town that looks vaguely familiar. It's both the same town that we saw in Ford's flashback, where the hosts were being trained on how to be human, and also the place where we saw Teddy flashback to in his memories of slaughtering all the people in Escalante with Wyatt. And this is the exact time and place Dolores' flashback occurs, indicating that she was present for it. This is the same town that Wyatt and Teddy laid waste to in Ford's new storyline, which Ford said in episode 3 when giving the storyline to Teddy was like all great fiction, rooted in truth. This could very well mean that the slaughter at Escalante was very real, just different people involved. So similar, the real events mirroring the narrative, that we actually see a man die the exact same way in both Dolores' flashback and the Wyatt flashback. The Dolores one right here, where it's a sheriff, and then the Teddy flashback where it's a Union officer, and I thought that was really interesting. We see in Dolores' flashback that she's seen firing a pistol before turning it on herself, and we see another person firing off rounds from a rifle. It's unknown if the rifleman was assisting Dolores or trying to stop her, but it would seem that Dolores might very well be connected to the death of Arnold, and maybe even a couple of other humans, because it didn't seem like everybody there was a guest. There was clearly a tech there who was helping teach the hosts how to dance. But the Wyatt slaughter and the Dolores slaughter are just too similar to be chalked up as just coincidence. Now the time periods start getting really confusing in this scene too. We've been led up to this point to be aware of 3 time periods. 35 years ago, when Arnold and Ford are both still working on the park itself and Arnold is having his secret meetings with Dolores. Then we have the William Logan time period, which we're assuming is about 30 years in the past, and then we have the present time period with the Man in Black and Ford. When we first see the town, we see Dolores in the gunslinger outfit and a town in the distance. She then walks alone towards the empty town. After the flashback lens flare, we see the town full of life and Dolores back in her dress. After the gun to the head incident, she is back in William's time period. However, there is no town anymore, not even an abandoned town. There's no prairie grass, there's no lazy river, it's just a barren wasteland as far as the eye can see, and the blackened, burned out church steeple just sticking out of the ground. The very same church steeple that we've seen in the present day with Ford and Bernard, when Ford was talking about his new storyline. Is this possibly an indication that William is actually, in fact, in the present, despite all the evidence we've seen on the contrary to that? Considering Dolores is so heavily involved in the scene and how we've already established that she's an unreliable narrator, it's hard to tell what she's actually seeing, but I think we can all relate to Dolores when she says, "When am I?" I think this helps lend credence to the fact that the Man in Black is, in fact, William 30 years into the future. However, despite how sure I am of it, I'm still constantly questioning myself and whether or not it's just a big, giant red herring. Alright, so I think that about does it for my breakdown of episode 8 of Westworld. I will do another video later this week to kind of do a bit of a mini breakdown on the teaser trailer, as well as some predictions on what I think will be coming up in the next episode and next 2 episodes as we gear up towards the season finale. So if you have enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what your theories are and what you think of what's going on in Westworld. And until next time, I will see you all later.